has over 15 years of experience in sales and sales management gathered across APAC. During this time, he has lived in Australia, India, Hong Kong, and Singapore and focused on solutions that use technology to improve efficiency. Ben and Sagar, over to you. Do enlighten us.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Bijoya. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us on a Saturday. So my name is Ben, and I lead Asia Pacific for Talkwalker. And so what will be, and I'm joined here today by my colleague Sagar. And so what we'll be doing today. So first, we'll briefly present Talkwalker. We'll then introduce the topic of influencer marketing, then looking directly into a case study of influencer marketing in action. Sagar will then be taking you through what changed in India during the pandemic around that topic. We will also afterwards discuss how to work with influencers now before digging deeper into the future of influencer marketing. We'll then open the floor to questions. And then one last thing before we let you go back to enjoying your Saturday and the rest of the weekend will be to highlight key takeaways from the session today. For all of you who haven't heard about Talkwalker before, so we're a listening and analytics company that empowers leading brands and agencies to optimize the impact of the marketing, communication, and consumer insight strategies. And so what we do is by providing a conversational intelligence platform, assisting brands and agencies with different solutions to our PMP framework that helps to protect, measure, and promote brands worldwide. And doing that by leveraging AI across media, customer, consumer, and market data. So we've also been recognized by recently by different industry experts such as Gartner, Forrester, G2 Crowd, and more. So I mentioned the PMP framework. So very briefly, it's what can Talkwalker assist you with. So our AI-powered software can help you protect your brand's reputation so you can manage crisis better. I think in the current context, clearly something that everybody could use a little help with. We can also assist you in measuring the success of your marketing campaigns or those of your competitors. And finally, also support you in crafting the best strategies to promote your brands or your products, and with real-time insights that we gather from analyzing conversations at scale. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. So what's so great about influencer marketing? So influencer marketing is a marketing channel like no other. So in the simplest of terms, it involves a brand or an agency co-creating content, and the co-creating part here is key. And so co-creating content with influencers that their audience resonates with. So it sounds pretty straightforward, but the main reason why we can't get enough of it, it's simply because it works. So we can see here, according to Adweek, and it's important to note that this is pre-corona data, 45% of marketeers believe that influencer marketing yields ROI, and 83% of consumers actually trust influencers. So of course, those numbers can simply not be ignored. So what we see also is that the more traditional ways of reaching your target audience, so via ads, is clearly on the decline. So one example of that is that the ad blocker usage has been steadily rising over the last few years. And we see that, for example, here in Asia Pacific, over 50% of people are actually using ad blockers. And of course, the solution to this is influencer marketing. So why? Well, here are very impressive numbers. So influencer marketing yields $23 for every dollar spent over the course of a year. And ads actually only yield a fraction of this as ROI. So if we look quickly at a real life case study of influencer marketing in practice or in action. So one of our partners, Hivency, worked with the famous makeup brand L'Occitane to launch a new product. So for this, L'Occitane decided a bit to go the unconventional route. No big names, no big celebrity this time, just everyday relatable people. And so to do that, they identify 14 micro-influencers. with the idea of having them promoting their product. And they were able to generate a campaign with 2% engagement rate and an earned media value, or EMV, of more than 1,800 euros. And you can see here actually the quote, but L'Occitane also went so far as to say that their campaigns with micro-influencers often work as well as their big budget media campaigns with macro-influencers. And the reason why is, well, mainly because of the very highly engaged and very highly loyal following that micro-influencers have. So the key message here is that not only does influencer marketing work, it's also budget friendly, something that is extremely relevant at the moment. And I will then pass it on to Sagar.
Thank you so much, Ben. So now that we understand how impactful influencer marketing can be and how it adds more value than traditional methods, let's look at it in today's context. Given how COVID has changed our day-to-day life, what I want to focus on is how influencer marketing has changed with the ongoing crisis, specifically in the context of India. So considering we are spending less time socializing, less time traveling, we've got more time on our hands. With that, people are much more open to content consumption, as you can see from these graphs here. So if you see this graph here, we can basically see that people are spending upwards of 4 hours a day on social media, and their social media usage is up by 75%. Now, what that means is that this is the perfect environment, perfect opportunity for influencers to shine, to build an even stronger, more engaged following. Of course, it's not the time for sponsored content, and we'll cover that just in a bit, but people are looking to be entertained, and that's where the influencers come in. So if we dig further into the data, and we specifically look for news consumption, Nielsen found that most of the increased consumption of content in India, it came from mini metros. It then further came from tier 2 cities and tier 3 cities. So basically what that means is that this paves the way for vernacular content to shine. This also means that there's a bigger piece of pie for everybody, including influencers. So having said that, there are challenges, right? The biggest challenge that creators are facing today is slashed budgets. And this is all across the world. Just to give you what that means, an idea of what that means, sponsored posts on Instagram went from 35% in February to just 4% in April. Now that's a huge drop, right? Not only that, there are predictions that cost of sponsored posts is set to reduce by another 15 to 25%. Travel influencers, lifestyle influencers, they've been really, really badly hit by COVID because mobility is the key for them to create the content. So what next? So what I'll do is we'll just do a quick poll to see what you're thinking. Do you think that the interest in influencer marketing as an industry will wane in the coming months and post-COVID? I'll just pause for, let's say, 30 seconds whilst you choose your answers. We'll look at the answers in a few minutes. Great. So whilst we know that influencers have been hit pretty bad, slowly but surely influencers are reinventing themselves. They're reinventing themselves, they're reinventing their content as well. In fact, influencers are actually able to cope and adapt to COVID much faster than most companies can. As often these influencers are a one-man show, and hence they're extremely agile, right? So if you look at this graph here, we can see that nearly 80% of them are looking at creating content which is related to coronavirus in order for them to stay relevant. And also almost 80% of this content is organic as well. And when we browse through our social media apps, everybody is using social media apps on their smartphone these days, we can easily see how resourceful influencers have been during these tough times. In terms of supplementing their income in the wake of reduced ad budgets, they're working on everything at the moment from affiliate programs, including merchandise sales from companies, to teaching courses, to even working on subscription models of their own, so that their audience can keep consuming their content that they create. This essentially means that they're actually working as a mini OTT platform at the moment. So the results for these, they look pretty impressive, right? The lockdown saw traditional fashion influencers share their version of the hugely popular banana bread. The Dettol hand wash challenge, which I'm sure most of you would have seen, it not only took the country by storm, but it also did a great job of raising awareness around COVID. There's also been an increased awareness around mental health issues these days, so much so that a bank collaborated with an influencer to speak about it. So there's a clear message around this. And the message is that the influencer marketing is not going anywhere. So COVID may have been a strong setback, but influencers are already adjusting to it. So we also looked at Google Trends, and we looked at the buzz around influencer marketing, and that's actually higher than ever today. There's a sharp spike post-lockdown. It really solidifies the fact that, although the budgets are lower, influencer marketing is definitely on the rise. And then it sort of brings us to why. And we just look into some of the reasons why. So firstly, influencers are a trusted voice. They hold the key to helping people adjust to the new normal. We simply have to learn to live with coronavirus, and influencers can actually help generate awareness around this, whether it's general hygiene, whether it's personal safety measures that people can take. But also, they can also help businesses showcase the safety measures that they've taken. This certainly helps these businesses to re-energize their sales. An example of this is travel, lifestyle influencers. They can help re-energize food delivery services, hotel stays, by showcasing the precautions that are taken by these establishments on their platform. Secondly, influencers also help build a sense of community. So they help build a sense of togetherness in this now familiar no contact world. Influencers create strong communities, as you can see in the image here. They're finding new ways to engage with them. Brands can also gain a lot by leveraging these kind of communities. So they can do this by promoting useful content. So something that actually genuinely adds value during the pandemic. They can be a little bit more relatable, right? So a whole host of brands are now talking about issues that are relevant to their audience. They can further engage better with these communities by choosing to associate with the influencers that have a strong and a very engaged community as well. It doesn't really matter if it's a small community, as long as it's a strong community, as long as it's a relevant and engaged community. And lastly, and I can't stress enough important on this, is by humanizing their products. It's by humanizing their service. This is a very, very powerful way to create brand love. So what does this mean for marketing, right? So for marketers, this presents a golden opportunity. This is the time for marketers now to play the long game. It's the time to invest in influencer marketing, especially when every penny spent needs to be justified. Marketing should also take this opportunity to work with influencers because they function as one-man agencies, right? They're skilled enough to conceptualize, they're skilled enough to create and to edit, as well as they're skilled enough to promote the content as well. And this is also a way to leverage increased engagement for these influencers as well. We'll just take a look at some of the influencer marketing campaigns that made magic over the last few months. The first one is the one that I mentioned earlier during the presentation, which is the Dettol Hand Wash Challenge. So undoubtedly, it's been the most successful influencer marketing campaign that India has seen so far this year, with over 50 billion views. So what they did was they chose to launch this campaign on TikTok with the help of a bunch of influencers and celebrities. So people simply had to wait for their signature Dettol song to begin and then wash their hands using Dettol's instructions. All this while, they were performing their favorite dance moves and subsequently asking people to participate in the challenge as well. So we did a quick search on the term Dettol on our tool, and it showed that the buzz around the brand gained huge traction in March, early April, as the campaign went viral. If you haven't seen it, I would strongly recommend you to go and have a look at the campaign. And another example is, of a really successful, really fantastic campaign is the one that was spearheaded by Gillette. So Gillette worked with a bunch of prominent influencers like Project Adgully, who spoke about self-care. They spoke about home grooming routines during the lockdown, whilst cleverly highlighting various Gillette Venus products as well. So what they did is they used this opportunity to normalize female grooming and self-care. So the last point is actually very, very important, especially in this time when the average millennial is much more socially conscious than they were even a couple of years ago. There's a strong social message behind most of the campaigns that we see today. Things like blatant promotion of your own products is actually a thing of the past. According to me, this new trend, this is the one that's here to stay. And yeah, just one final example that I wanted to cover was the influencer marketing campaign by Reebok. So we did a quick search on workout, again on our tool, and we clearly saw that there is a massive increase, 74% increase in the buzz around it. This helped us to understand why Reebok India thought that it would be a good time to launch a campaign around home workouts, where they had several brand ambassadors, fitness instructors, athletes. They were sharing workout videos with the Reebok community. Again, the idea here is to add value to the day-to-day life of the consumer and staying relevant during this time when people hardly have access to any non-essential goods, right? And those include the ones that are sold by Reebok. So they're clearly playing the long game here where they hope to win brand love. They are counting on people to evangelize and promote their product post-COVID. So these were the three examples that I wanted to give. And with this, what I'm going to do is just do a handover to Ben so that he can take you through collaborating with influencers during the time of COVID.
All right, thank you, Sagar, for those great examples. So yeah, here we'll be looking at how should you go about collaborating with influencers and creating campaigns like the ones we just mentioned, right? But before we get into that, let's do another quick poll to see, according to you, what percentage of people actually trust influencers for purchase decisions, right? So you have four options. Option A, 12%, B, 25%, C, 6%, and D, over 30%. All right, we'll be looking at the answers a bit a bit later. But thank you for participating. So, how should you go? How to choose, the best influencer for your brand? Well, the broad best practices for collaborating with influencers during COVID are still more or less the same as before, but with some minor changes. First and foremost, it's really important to select the influencers that resonate with your target audience. Most marketeers actually believe that the quality and creativity of the content is the most important factor for this. Next, it's important to carefully consider how relevant your message is in the current scenario, and to also understand whether it comes across as opportunistic. Even when people really stretch their imagination, and we've seen so many examples of the last couple of months. So why is it that important? Is that if there's really one thing that COVID has done recently, it's shifted the focus from selling first. Now, when it comes to working with influencers in the current context, so well, one thing is that is great, and we've seen that a bit earlier, is that they're more or less self-sufficient, and they're capable of creating very high quality content quite easily. An important thing to remember, and we highlighted this at the beginning, is really the co-creation aspect of this. So influencers understand their audience much better than anyone else, and that includes all of us, right? So giving them some degree of independence while creating the content is clearly the best way forward. Another important point that we need to note here is the fact that shoots are pretty rare today, and this is probably going to be the only way forward, and for quite a while. Last but not least, the challenge of measuring ROI has become even more complex during COVID, right? So we ran a survey last year, and the pre-COVID data suggested at the time already that 61% of marketers in India lacked any tools to measure the success of their influencer marketing campaigns. And according to Adgully, an influencer marketing program is only as good as its measurement strategy. So it's really crucial to develop the right KPIs across the funnel for your influencer marketing strategy, especially since budgets are involved. Additionally, ROI should only be measured in terms of marketing dollar, but also sentiment analysis, top authors, demographics, and other relevant metrics. And lastly, while during this pandemic, it's very important to analyze the audience sentiment about COVID-19 as well, before publishing any type of content. And so that brings us to the last section of our session today. So what does the future of influencer marketing look like? So, well, we don't really know when COVID crisis will start abating or what the world will look like after this. We're starting to see glimpses of how it could look like and what it's going to be about, emerging here and there. But still, clarity is not complete. So what we do know is that people will think twice in terms of every purchase decision that they make. So consumers' journeys will forever be colored by the COVID crisis. And that's where influencers come in. Why? Because they're trusted voices, and trust is everything today. Already before, people wanted to support brands that they felt they were feeling that this brand was taking some stands that were relevant to them. And instead of going from product A to product B, they were going for a brand that they believed in. And this is exactly what it's about today. And it's even more important. Everybody wants to be reassured that they are in good hands. And therefore, brands must step up their games to ensure that their customers feel safe, but also feel that they're supporting the right brand. And so influencers are key for this. And people trust them. And in turn, they help the brands build a strong connection with the audience. So what we've seen also increasing is the thirst for content consumption that we see today and that we've seen over the last couple of months. And clearly, this is something that is here to stay. It certainly looks, it has become part and parcel of people's daily lives. And the spotlight, of course, is on influencers. There will also be newer channels of distribution of content. And this is clearly one of the biggest explanations for the meteoric rise of TikTok during the lockdown, or the huge success of OTT content during this time, and specifically regional content. In fact, Instagram is already attempting to fill the gap for TikTok with Reels, and we've also seen Twitter launching their version of Stories just a few months ago. So this means that influencers are busier than ever, figuring out algorithms, what works for them, and what makes their audience stick. Brands will therefore be in a position to leverage that post-COVID. Lastly, and we've seen that before with Sagar, influencers play a huge role in humanizing brands. They put a face on your brand's product and services, and that really helps your brand gain brownie points, and this won't change post-COVID. And we see here actually the answer to the poll, 33%. So it was option D, more than 30%. 33% of people trust influencers before making purchase decisions. And so one of the main reasons people trust influencers is that they're individuals, just like you and I. This means they're flawed and therefore relatable. At the same time, they're also considered experts in their fields, and this is extremely relevant to millennials. 90% of social media users were convinced to make a purchase after they saw relevant content, and they even trust, and this is really interesting, and they even trust influencers over their friends and family. This is something that clearly we couldn't have imagined even a few years ago. People trust influencers twice more than their friends and family. And after COVID, well, it will be full speed ahead for all businesses that will have to bridge the gap of the last couple of months. And tapping into influencer marketing as a channel will for sure not go anywhere. And so what happens next? Well, the increased independence for content creators that COVID has seen is here to stay. As we mentioned earlier, today we have no choice but to give influencers a greater degree of autonomy as compared to what maybe we were doing pre-COVID times. And despite this, influencer marketing campaigns seem to be doing pretty well. And this trend is here to stay, freeing up valuable resource in marketing teams all over the world, but also in the budgets. And last but not least, live content will become more of a norm than the extra mile. This sees an increased degree of engagement and really adds value to people's lives. Consumer will grow to expect this moving forward from any brand. So that brings us to the end of our session today. So we'll now be taking questions. But thanks already, for staying with us until now. So we see different questions in the Q&A part. So we see, how can we measure the influencer marketing campaigns? Well, of course, that's a very good question and clearly relevant, as we've seen that already before COVID, before it was that as important as it is today, more than 61% of marketers in India didn't have the right measurement strategy in place. So there's different tools that can be used for that. But what's extremely important is always to think beforehand, and because your influencer marketing will only be as good as your measurement strategy. So what are you going to measure? What are the KPIs that you want to put all the way during the funnel? And what are you going to be accountable for afterwards to the business and to the people that have accepted you using a budget? And engagement rates are one, EMV, earned media value, can be another one. But generally also chatter about the brand, and we've seen it with some of examples. Some brands just took stands into some societal debates recently. And that has also generated a lot of positive noise for them. Another question, so how do you decide which influencer to sign up and how to approach them? What are the payout strategies? Well, here, of course, there's some basics there that I think will be known to everyone, but it's extremely important first to know your target audience. What we see is that too many brands are trying to create products that are the fit for everyone, right? But at some point, there's no shame into being an expert or being the product for a specific demographics. On the contrary, this can generate a lot of positivity in revenue. So first, knowing your target audience will be key. And then afterwards, but just again, either using tools or using your networks of what people have seen or what people have used, you will be able to find influencers. And we've seen it with L'Occitane. You don't have to go through the macro to the celebrity to the big bucks directly. A lot of micro influencers can be identified very quickly, and you can use them and try to approach them and start doing your first part in influencer marketing. And then payout strategy, well, of course, that's different things. So that's, again, something that we'll have to see between the brand and influencers themselves. There's different options. Of course, some of them will be sponsored. Some of them will receive the product and promote them. And there's other ways to do that. So another question is, what should brands do to ensure the content comes across authentic when they engage with influencers? Any good purpose-driven examples recently that were authentic? Well, that's a very good question. Once again, and this is always what brands have to be. Will people think that it is real? That is really the brand? Is this really what I believed in? And I think the larger the brand, potentially the most difficult it is. to really stay authentic, or at least to appear authentic to your audience. And why? It's because all of us are more judgy than before. We all have access to so much information. Millennials are spending their time looking for information, having basically the whole internet in their pocket, right? So they will be more judging, and they will be expecting potentially even more. But I think there's a brand that has been quite impressive. We've seen it, the Dettol, I think one was extremely positive, not only for what it was, but also because it created just more understanding about the crisis. And another one that is more on a personal side is generally what Nike is doing. Despite being such a huge brand, they've always took some stand in the public debate. And they've recently, again, I don't know if you've watched that campaign of all the different videos edited together, showing all the differences in sports and all the scenes following one another. This is something that was absolutely beautiful. So another question here, what kind of product categories will benefit from influencer marketing? Well, I think, this is growing. And what we see in India is that any type of product can be used, and put in, and you can put an influencer marketing strategy around any type of product. Of course, there's the ones that everybody expects, and we've seen some example earlier today. But I believe that at the moment, we shouldn't put ourselves any limits. Consumer expect potentially a lot, but potentially they don't know what they don't know. And trying and making noise and using creativity will always be rewarded eventually. So I see quite a lot of other questions. I don't know how much time we have left, but happy to take a few more, of course. So how to bring brand loyalty with influencers? How to create a model where influencers post organically just out of brand love? Any examples? Yeah, I can imagine the intent, behind that question. Yes, this is something that, of course, will be extremely important. The thing is that, yes, of course, we might see some micro and macro influencers, just sharing their time because they strongly believe into a brand. And I think I don't have any examples here on top of my mind, but we can definitely follow up with some because we've seen some of them recently. But this will always potentially be a challenge. Is that influencers could also go to others to promote their own products. But what we see also is, again, recently, more of a sense of accountability over there, meaning that they will not go from one competitor to the other, right? Because that will also drastically impact negatively their following, right? And what we always have to remember is that an influencer is only as good as their following.
We have 10 more minutes, Ben.
All right, 10 more minutes.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So we can take some more questions here. Since we're talking about micro-influencers, a typical brand may have different micro-influencer from specific areas, demographics, etc. Absolutely. And we've seen it with L'Occitane in the example, and there's a lot of other examples. So they use 14, so 1/4 of those micro-influencers. And for a region and a country such as India, with all the differences across the different areas and cities, this is even more relevant because micro-influencers will have a following that generally is either very product or industry related or very strong into their area and demographics, right? And so the advice here is always to try to find multiple micro ones in order to tackle to all the different specificities that your market has to offer. And India clearly has a lot to offer. So do we have to customize content based on such influencers groups? Does that run the risk of diluting the campaign? Again, this is another interesting point. It will depend from what you, I think, you would like to do. Some people advocate strongly that there will never be a content overdrive. There will never be too much content, because people anyway we're all surrounded by so much content that it's hard for us even to notice whether it's coming from a brand A or brand B. So some strong advocates are for publish as much as possible, because at some point one of your content will be used and will create some good returns on investments there. But yeah, customization is interesting. But of course, the same content can be used across the multiple platforms. Now, if you use a TikTok, if you have Instagram, if you have LinkedIn, if you have Twitter, if you have Facebook or whatever, YouTube, the same content can be used. And we've seen so many influencers, from large to smaller ones, using and leveraging the same content over multiple platforms. So and they've generated great results. So here, what we've seen is that potentially this is something to recommend. And the risk of diluting the quality of the campaign is actually not that high. How to differentiate between celebrity and social media influencer? Yeah, well, clearly, I think there's the obvious way to filter them and to differentiate and to split the different groups. Social media influencer, a lot of people that are actually not celebrities could be considered social media influencers. And again, you have different ways to look for them. Some will be micro influencers, so a following base that is not that high, and others will actually have a following base, that is increasing and that are not that known. And then you have the regular celebrity, of course, but then, generally the more popular the influencer is and the more it's known the influencer is, the higher the spend will be. So you have really to measure carefully what you expect to get out of this and whether or not it's worth the investment, especially if it's extremely high. How do you decide the ROI beyond just reach and engagement? Yeah, good question. So what we see is that, of course, engagement, reach, earned media value, will always be relevant KPIs and ways to measure the return on investment. But to come back to other points and also other questions and trying to connect them here, what we see is that just having another type of demographics, talking about your brand or engaging about your brand, could be relevant. Another maybe another metro area could be interesting also to get. So I think it's really depending on where you are into the development of your product, how popular those products are, and who are you trying to target, right? And then the different metrics and KPIs can be just who is sharing it, could be, what is the demographics that is talking about it? What are the languages or regional languages that are being used that you potentially didn't know you're talking to? All those could be relevant metrics put in there. Do you think people also perceive influencer marketing as a cliche? Well, maybe, but it's working, right? So is it something that is really relevant for you to think? Even if it's a cliche, clearly we've seen it's working. And we've seen it working with micro influencers, so really with budgets that are much more limited. And of course with macro influencers and celebrity wise. And so at some point as a business is that, especially in those times, yes, you need to have quality content. You need to make sure your content is not perceived as opportunistic. But if what you're doing can be perceived as a cliche by a certain target, by a certain category of people, everybody will anyway always have detractors, right? And influencer marketing as well. What matters is whether or not it's working for your brand, your product, and whether or not you feel that it's adding to the brand love, generally speaking. And so we are here, is it a right idea to catch multiple influencers with small number of followers, say less than 10K? Well, clearly, this is something that we've seen successful. 10K is already a solid number. What you should be looking at how frequently do they publish and how engaged is their following, right? And if you've seen that it's a following base that has been steadily growing, but the same people have always been there, then it's generally a good sign for the influencer, right? Because generally those micro-influencers will have extremely loyal following base. And this is extremely important for you as a brand, because the most loyal, the following based, the more they will engage, and the most likely, potentially, they will be in those 33% of people that will actually look at this content before making a purchase decision in favor of one of your products or services. What if your competitor has used some influencers? Does it make sense to use them for your campaign? How do followers differentiate messaging? Again, so here we'll see that, well, what's interesting here is the same way as micro and super macro and celebrity influencers generally won't be working for competitors, right? Because this will send the wrong message to their following, right? So if you have the celebrities, so let's imagine, some football players and everything anyway are linked to a brand, right? But if you look also very like down the road to micro influencers, their following being extremely extremely close to them, following their every move almost, will not tolerate them moving from one brand to another, because it dilutes the message completely. And then the question of whether or not this is authentic or just going after dollars will then be strongly coming, and the answer will most likely be yes, and therefore imparting your brand negatively, especially if you're the second and the one to follow. So be the first in that then. All right, do we still have some time for a question?
Ben, you may take one more question, one or two more questions.
All right. What is a good frequency of publishing content on Instagram, influencer or otherwise? So again, I'm not an expert. I'm not directly an expert into Instagram publishing content specifically, so I don't have the numbers here. What we see generally potentially being successful is that you shouldn't limit yourself into publishing content, because I personally believe that the more content, potentially the best. Some people will say the opposite, that you should be extremely targeted. You should only publish it at a certain time using specific, carefully chosen words. Yes, of course, you can do that if you're maybe a large brand that everybody knows, and that products are well known and well established in the market. But if you're really trying to get into a new market, getting into a new category, get into a new demographics, we would maybe advise in trying to publish as much content as possible, not only on Instagram, but then using that Instagram content maybe to go to TikTok or to LinkedIn. And we've seen great examples of that. All right, and then just one last question, because I've seen it a couple of times. So there's also a new trend where influencers are buying views and followers. How to filter such people? Well, clearly, when there's money to be made, some people will find ways, to maybe take some shortcuts. So again, here, it's by looking, for example, so there's tools to do that will help you, of course, filter out those maybe, so there's the bots part, and then people that are just buying views and followers. Is by looking, for example, if you don't want to use tools, you can also be looking at just the growth of the following base, right? If you see huge spikes for someone that is not that well known and that hasn't published any type of content recently, generally speaking, there's something that maybe is not that right. So just by using common sense, to be honest, and by looking at huge spikes into and huge differences into behaviors or into the base itself. All right. So I can see there's a lot of other questions, so thanks a lot. But I think that we'll be following up on them maybe afterwards. Joya, happy to also take them offline, take those questions offline, and send back some answers.
Thank you, Ben. Thanks for your time. And Sagar, it was great listening to you guys. If there's a concluding slide or something that you would want to share with the viewers, do share it.
Yeah, so it's really one last slide, and we promise everybody will be able to go back to their Saturday and to their weekend. I imagine everybody has exciting things planned. So here we just want to highlight some key takeaways, right? So first, so influencer marketing, it's not just a fad, right? In fact, it is one of the best channels for marketing. The COVID lockdown has led to a huge increase in media consumption in India, and mostly from mini metro cities. In the face of huge budget cuts, we see a big decrease in sponsored content, leading to influencers reinventing themselves. However, there have been many successful campaigns with influencers during lockdown, and we've seen great examples of those. The main challenge that brands face for influencer marketing in India specifically is tracking the success of the campaigns and ROI, basically the measurement framework attached to it that is as important. And lastly, and most importantly, so influencer marketing is here to stay, and that's clear, and will become even bigger post-pandemic. And that's because they humanize brands and they help win trust, which is extremely important at the moment. Well, it always was, but maybe even more at the moment than a couple of months ago. All right. So with that, thank you again for joining today's session. We hope you find it relevant and that you could use maybe some of those KPIs to go back to the office, or if you're still working from home from Monday.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Sagar, again. That was an interesting session. However, I think there are a few points which our viewers would want to clarify it more. So we will take them offline and we can share those questions with you. Maybe you can get back to them with more details today because of the time constraints. Maybe you've not been able to address them. We'll share those questions with you, and then it can be shared with all the people who've written to us. Yeah. Thank you, Ben.
Clearly, because there's many more questions, also people asking for slides
Yes.
themselves. So we'll definitely be addressing that offline.
Questions. Maybe you can respond to them. They are all very senior people from the industry who had attended the session because they wanted some clarity on some of their queries on the influencers and micro influencers. I'll share them with you, and then we'll reach out to all the participants who've shared their queries. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Thanks for your time.
Thank
Have
you,
a great
Joya.
week, everyone.
You too. Bye-bye.